right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome so much to our What Linens Know, a creative and contemporary approach to needlework in everyday life virtual program with Ruth Tabancay. We're so happy to have Ruth here today to talk about not only a special exhibition that she has at the 61st Annual Woodlawn Needlework Show in Alexandria, Virginia, called What Linens Know, along with another piece that she's going to be talking about that we are exhibiting as part of this year's show. She'll be talking about that and then many other works, as you can see behind her, and understanding a little bit more about her history and the stories that sort of inform the art that she has been doing and does today. So the What Linens Know, Creative and Temporary Approach to Needlework in Everyday Life is a presentation where Ruth is going to be exploring unconventional concepts using various artistic medium, including her stitching of reused dried tea bags to create everyday items, such as quilts, bedspreads, and clothing. And she's also going to be sharing with her both professional and personal histories that influenced and inspired this work. So we're really excited to have her here. A few housekeeping details. If you could keep yourself on mute during the presentation, that would be terrific. I also wanted to introduce myself. My name is Heather Johnson. I'm Deputy Director at the Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey House. I'm here along with Jenny Humphreys, who's our Operations Coordinator and our Tech Extraordinaire for today. If you have any questions, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. But during the course of the presentation, if you have any questions for Ruth, please put them in the chat and we can get to those during the Q&A at the end. So let me tell you just a little bit about Ruth. Ruth Tabancay's passion for science led her to study microbiology in college. Following a stint as a hospital laboratory technologist, she went on to medical school, and after 11 years in private practice, she left medicine to study art. Her bodies of work include those based on microscopy and magnification, geometry, both Euclidean and non-Euclidean, and her recent work focuses on environmental issues and ecological systems. Her techniques include embroidery, stitching, crochet, assemblage, rotary knitting, jacquard weaving, felting, cast sugar, and installation. Ruth is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, the University of California School of Medicine in San Francisco, and the California College of the Arts. Her work has been exhibited regionally and nationally, including the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco, the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, the World Financial Center, New York City, and San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. And she lives in Berkeley, California. Please welcome Ruth Tabancay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Heather, for that introduction. And I appreciate everybody who's joining us on Zoom this afternoon. And thank you to Heather and the Woodlawn Pope-Leighey House for inviting me to display my series of embroidered textiles, vintage linens, What Linens Know series during the show Needlework in Everyday Life. I'll be talking about that work and some of my other artworks. I'm talking to you from my home in Berkeley, California, the territory of Wechan, the ancestral and unceded homeland of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people who have lived here since time immemorial. I recognize the history of the land and the indigenous communities that are alive and flourishing. Next. Next. About 100 miles south of San Francisco to immigrant Filipino parents. My fascination with textiles harks back to childhood watching my mother crochet doilies, edgings, and tablecloths, tat edgings for handkerchiefs, and embroider pillowcases and dish towels. I learned how to machine sew in middle school, sewing some of my own clothes and clothing for my siblings. I crocheted, knitted, and tried embroidery, but I wasn't very good at it. On that left side of the picture, my parents are at the housewarming of their new home in Watsonville in 1951. And on the right is my family dressed for a special coronation of officers for my father's Filipino organization. And I'm the child on the left wearing my special Filipino dress. Growing up, I loved math and sciences and majored in bacteriology in college. Then I worked in hospital laboratories for 2 years and went on to medical school. I completed a residency in pediatrics and was in private practice for 11 years before deciding to go to art school. And even though I had all the schooling and residency, and while I was working in private practice, I was always involved in making some kind of textile, either sewing clothes, crocheting afghans, vests, did needlepoint and quilting. I took day-long and week-long workshops in quilting and even classes in graphic design to learn more about visual composition. Next. As an art student, I worked with traditional hand weaving, textile printing, computerized jacquard weaving, felting, and fiber sculpture. I attended school part-time while raising 3 daughters, and by taking 2 classes a semester, it took me 9 years to complete my degree. But with the projects I completed, I realized that microbiology and microscopy would be important themes in my work. Even though hand stitching is now an important part of my art practice, I did very little of it until my last year in school. My fiber sculpture teacher gave us an assignment to make art out of something that we use every day. So at the time, my teenage daughter and I had been sitting on her bed, snuggling in comforters and drinking tea while doing her geometry homework. The used tea bags accumulated on the windowsill, and so I decided to use this material for that assignment to mark those intimate moments with my daughter. For me, tea bags represent physical and emotional warmth, thrift, and recycling. This work on the screen, Extending the Useful Life, stitched in 2010, is my 3rd version of that original school quilt for my senior show, and it's 85% scale of the regular twin-size bed. If you look on the right, the detail to me, the surface looks like squamous epithelium as seen under the microscope. I continued to use tea bags in my artwork for the next 11 years, and I'm grateful for the dozens of people who saved their tea bags for me. I have some other tea bag pieces later on in the presentation to show you. But by 11 years, I was done with tea bags, but stuck creatively. So in 2010, I began a fiber arts certificate program at the University of Washington in Seattle. And for that 9-month course, I made 26 round trips between Oakland and Seattle. But it was worth the time. I was challenged with new teachers, new assignments, a new range of concepts and materials. And for anybody who wants to take a new direction in their artwork, I'm a firm believer in changing your surroundings. For one assignment, I was asked to depict, next, I'm sorry. Yeah, for one assignment, I was asked to depict something about history. Although I could have used any textile technique, I stumbled across a coaster-sized doily at a vintage shop and decided I could embroider its history from the point of view of the doily. I started by embroidering the imprint of a water ring left on the table, and that doily was the start of the series, What Linens Know, the work in this exhibition. So I focused on the idea of embroidering the history of how vintage linens were used in the home. Once they were used, linens were often washed and ironed, and any history they had was erased. So embroidery was a way to permanently leave that mark on the linens. To get the images to embroider, I'll use an actual object to see what imprint would be left behind. So using a water glass, a wine glass, and a coffee mug, I poured liquid into those containers, and I either sloshed them around or even dipped the base of that container into the liquid and printed that on muslin. Then I traced that stain, transferred it to the vintage linen to embroider it. Next. Here's some detail shots of several installations of this work. On the left, there's an embroidered water condensation ring. On the right, a ring left by a coffee mug. Next. On the left, there are overlapping wine glass rings. And on the right is a hanky with blood spots from a bloody nose. Next. A table runner might have been used to hold a metal bucket with water and flowers. So I did just that. I set the bucket with flowers and water on a piece of muslin with the bouquet. And over several days, as a shrivel of flowers dropped onto the muslin, I drew the petals and leaves and pollen, traced that onto the actual vintage linen and embroidered that. And for that rust ring, I pressed the container into the muslin and rotated it around a few times just to get a better mark that I could embroider. Next. The dinner napkin on the left, I imagined a dinner guest might hide chicken bones in a napkin. And on the right, the crescent shape is one of two pieces of what someone described to me as a bowl surround. So this would decorate, you would place this linen, the two pieces on the outside of a bowl to decorate it. I only own one of these, but I embroidered what gravy spill might have looked like on that piece of linen. Next. On the left is a liner for a bread basket. It's embroidered with the words hot rolls, pretty obvious. And the four wings, if you can recognize them, are meant to be folded over the bread in the basket. So I embroidered crusts of bread and poppy seeds on this textile. On the right, I've imagined that somebody might put an ashtray on top of a linen like this. So I embroidered cigarette butts and ashes on that. Next. On the right, the napkin has lipstick imprints on it. And on the left, there's the lipstick imprints. And on the right, another bread basket liner. And the words, which are hard to read, say, hot rolls make the, and then there's an image of a butterfly. So the message is hot rolls make the butter fly, and with more embroidery on that also. Next. I found vintage linens on eBay and local secondhand and antique shops. And while I was looking for them, I came across this toddler dress that I just couldn't resist. So what I did for this is excuse me, I embroidered, and I guess I would have to say, in the 50s, it was common for girls to wear dresses that had embroidered toys, dolls, or baby animals on them. So I embroidered the shapes of the objects that my daughters were playing with in 2010. So there's a CD, a flip phone, a laptop, and an iPod. And now 14 years later, the technology has evolved, and except for the laptop, these objects are considered dated. Next. This piece is in the exhibit. It's blankie, made of used tea bags stitched onto muslin. And it's the only tea bag piece where I've added an additional material, the satin binding, because what could be more warm and intimate than a baby blanket? For two of my daughters, the satin binding was the most important part of the blanket, so I had to include it. I think of all the textiles that people continue to make. I think that a blanket for a baby, whether it's crocheted, knitted, quilted, or embroidered, is an item that people often want to make. And even people who aren't expert at that particular craft, they still want to make that baby blanket. And often I hear stories of people years later have still not finished that baby blanket. But, you know, that's so endearing to me because a blanket like this is made out of love. And for that reason, regardless of the technique, I think that maybe this piece most closely fits in with the theme, needlework in everyday life, because it's something that almost seems universal. And the skill's not important in making this, but the love is what's there for that. Okay, next. The next few slides, I'll be talking about other ways I use embroidery for my artwork. I mentioned earlier that I have a background in microbiology, and a lot of my work is based on that. So for this series, What's in You and on You, Normal Flora and Pathogens, I embroidered bacterial and fungal shapes as seen through the microscope. And for the colors of the fabric and the embroidery floss, I chose colors that we would see in the laboratory. The stains of the bacteria tend to be orange and purple. We use blood agar and chocolate agar. It's not really chocolate, but digested blood. And the different microscopes have a different tint to the light field, like yellow. Often they're white, but sometimes that light is bluish. And some colors I just use for fun. But each one of these that you're seeing here represents a particular bacteria embroidered with the particular characteristics of that bacteria. Next. Okay, here's some closer shots. Starting in the upper left, going clockwise, I've embroidered what the normal flora of the mouth would look like. So you're seeing here Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, Neisseria, Haemophilus, Corynebacterium, and on a pink fabric to represent the oral mucosa. To the right of that, that's a Salmonella species. And what's typical of Salmonella is this orange color stain as seen on the microscope, but they have flagella, which propel them through the fluid medium. So I've made flagella out of a single strand of embroidery floss. Below that is Aspergillus. That's the kind of mold that you would see growing on maybe bread or an orange. And to the left of that is a fungal structure. They're mycelia growing on blood agar. Okay, next. Continuing with the microscopy theme, this installation is called Serratia over San Francisco, and it's based on experiments done in the 50s by the Army to test the efficacy of what was then called germ warfare. I used, excuse me. Serratia marcescens is a pigmented bacteria in all shades of red, and it was thought to be harmless at the time, and so was used to conduct these experiments in the San Francisco Bay. The Navy released the bacteria into the ocean off the coast of San Francisco, where it became aerosolized and was blown inland. By the mid-70s, these experiments coincided with an outbreak of Serratia at San Francisco Hospital, and there were 11 documented cases of urinary tract infection, and one patient died from endocarditis. And though this case and 100 other outbreaks of Serratia were assessed by the Center for Disease Control, none of them were proven to be the same strain as the strains that the Army used. But Serratia marcescens is now known as a cause of hospital-acquired infection. So I filtered about 700 pink, red, and maroon colored bacteria from wool roving for this installation. Wet felting involves laying 3 to 5 thin layers of roving down at different angles, then wetting the fiber with warm soapy water and rubbing it to get the layers to intertwine with each other. And that's a simplification. There are many more steps, but that's basically how it's done. So the left is the installation on an 8-foot by 8-foot wall, and on the right, there's a close-up detail of that. Next. Okay, I mentioned that I had worked in a hospital laboratory where one of my tasks was to examine red blood smears. So occasionally I would come across what's called a crenated red blood cell, which is a spherical shape with protrusions. And it was so exciting to find these. They're only a staining artifact. They're not any particular disease, but that shape has always stuck with me. These are also wet felted wool roving, and the individual cells are about the size of a tennis ball to softball-sized spheroids. Next. You might remember from science class in grade school or high school that light travels in a straight line. And since nobody ever challenged that, I just didn't think anything of it. But later, when I learned more about the scanning electron microscope, the scanning electron microscope works by releasing electrons in the scanner, which bounce around in all directions. So for this reason, you can get a three-dimensional view of whatever you're examining. I use a Hitachi TM1000 scanning electron microscope at UC Berkeley to examine weave structures of dozens of fabrics. As a weaver, I'm particularly interested in weave structure, and seeing these fabrics close up magnified 100 to 400 times actual size was a real treat for me. So I took some of these images and wove them on the thread controller TC1 computerized jacquard loom. If you think of making a pot holder, as you probably did when you were a child, and you're taking that stretchy loop that goes across and going over and over and under the vertical loops, that would be the equivalent of a 2-harness loom. And for us, the jacquard loom, computerized jacquard loom, that's the equivalent of a 1,320 harness loom. And if you take all of those combinations, and I don't even know how to figure out how many combinations that is, you can get images with a high resolution so you can weave photographs. And that's what I've done here. On the left is a scanning electron micrograph. That's a picture. It's printed on paper. It's not woven, of black nylon knee highs, like the kind you would find at a drugstore. And that was magnified in the original image at 156 times actual size. And on the right is a hand-woven computerized jacquard weaving based on an electron micrograph of the right side of synthetic knit jersey. And that weaving is 322 times the actual size. It was important to me to leave my hand in the work. So on this paper image, and also in the weaving, there are contrasting colors of hand stitching that I put into them. These micrographs and weavings are made mostly with machines. The textiles are manufactured. They're looked at in the scanning electron microscope. I manipulate the images in Photoshop, and then hand weaving them on a computerized loom. So to me, that's something on face value that anybody can do. But to put myself into it, I put hand stitching into each of these. Next. On the left is the reverse side of knit jersey. And if you're a knitter, you might recognize that as a purl side, where I put stitches into that, hand stitches. And on the right is titled supplemental. And these are both 322 times actual size. And if you look carefully, you can see I've embroidered bacteria into that work. Next. My current body of work concerns environmental issues. I don't think anyone can deny that plastic pollution is overwhelming the planet. So for an Earth Day show in 2017, I had the idea, what if bacteria could digest plastic? So I started embroidering plastic bags and styrofoam trays with rod-shaped organisms. And it turns out that this was actually happening in the research laboratory. And in reports dating back to 2015, it's been found that mealworms were able to digest styrofoam. Next. This piece on the left is called Adapting to New Substrates. Laboratory research all over the world is finding organisms like the mealworm Tenebrio molitor can digest styrofoam, and the waxworm Galleria melanella can digest polyethylene, and other organisms have been found to digest polyurethane, CDs, plastic film, and nylon. For these pieces, I embroidered bacteria, fungi, and mealworms on different types of plastic. There's styrofoam trays, face masks, plastic bags, red party cups, vegetable tags, bubble wrap, and straws. Next. This piece is entitled Xylem and Flow. One of my favorite books of recent years is Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. She describes the mycorrhizal network connecting of the network of fungi growing among the roots of trees in the forest, and how this association enables trees to communicate with each other and share nutrients. With the circular embroidered motifs, I'm depicting the cross-section of trees with the individual cells depicting the xylem and the phloem, and the white feather stitches that are embroidered are the microscopic fungi, the mycelia, among the tree roots. Next. I use crochet as a structural element in my work. This form is called hyperbolic crochet, which creates this three-dimensional structure using a constant rate of increase. And for the crocheters in the audience, I crocheted 5 single crochet, and in the 6th stitch, I did an increase. So I did this over and over again, thousands of times, exact same pattern. And this forms this three-dimensional structure. This work is entitled Hyperbolic Coral. It's about 16 inches tall, 24 inches wide, and 22 inches deep, and weighs 17 pounds. Okay, next. This work is entitled Bleached, and it's the first in a series of coral reef pieces that I've been making. This is an environmental piece and really very personal for me. I'm depicting the bleaching of the coral reefs, a result of climate change. The cascade starts with the burning of fossil fuel, leading to global warming and a subsequent increase in ocean temperature, which is deadly for corals. Also, fossil fuels are used in the manufacture of plastic. So I created these imaginary coral reef organisms with discarded medical plastic. I had a lung transplant in 2019, and as part of my treatment, I gave myself infusions at home. So I saved all kinds of plastic from the infusion kits. There were needle caps, syringe covers, needle sheaths, tubing caps. And while I needed this treatment to live, it's a conflict with me that I added to the plastic pollution that's overwhelming the earth. Next. In another body of work, I focus on hexagon shapes and grids. I remember as a child puzzling over the tile patterns on my grandmother's bathroom floor. I was tracing the shapes of hexagon flowers and trying to figure out how they connected with each other. And so that memory has stuck with me. So I have used 6-sided symmetry in a lot of my work. This is a machine stitch hexagon quilt called Tumbling Black Pattern, which I've machine stitched and then hand quilted. Next. Here are 2 quilts made out of round tea bags, also using the hexagon grid for the design. So I collected tea bags, painted them with acrylic paint, and hand stitched them onto muslin. One of the people who saved tea bags for me ran a weaving school, and the students were particularly fond of a kind of tea that came in round tea bags. So she was a big source for me. So I laid the tea bags out in these hexagon patterns. The piece on the right, just for reference, is almost 6 feet tall. The one on the left is more like 48 inches tall. So, but while I had a lot of fun playing with the hexagon design, stitching them down meant that they were permanent. I couldn't play with the pieces anymore. And I wanted to have a flexibility in the design. Next. So I started making these hexagon pieces out of cast sugar using a mold to get the hexagon shape. And I cooked them the way you would cook hard candy, with table sugar, glucose, and paste food coloring. And because sugar degrades in the air because of the moisture, these are all coated with polyurethane. So I could arrange these in any pattern I want based on the hexagon grid, and could change it anytime I want. And in fact, the piece on the right, that's a 4-foot by 6-foot platform. Every week of the exhibition, I changed and added to that piece. So there are 4 different variations based on that. Next. This installation is called Hive. If you set the hexagons edge to edge and sew them, they'll form a 2-dimensional plane, very flat, that if theoretically could extend out to infinity. But if you put in a pentagon, a 5-sided shape, or a heptagon, you can create a concave or convex shape. And in the piece on the right, there's a gold pentagon. I think you can see it. It's right next to one of the white hexagons. And that is starting to swing this into a 3-dimensional shape. Next. This is another hexagon piece in which I've included many pentagons to form this bowl shape. This piece is also called Hive, and I've embroidered different pests. You can see little different stitches there in the hexagons. Natural pests of bees, varroa mites, and the waxworm, Galeria melanella. Galeria melanella digests beeswax, and that is the same organism that can also digest polyethylene. So I think there's something really there to be understood about how these how these pests can digest the beeswax. Next. And here we're back to the original piece that's in the show. And actually, I believe there are 17 different linens that Heather has installed on a table and chair little set. And I feel like that is so much more inviting and more practical than showing them flat on a wall like this without a context. So if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to take a look at that, because it just thrills me that I'm seeing them now in context. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending my presentation today. It's been a pleasure to show you how I use embroidery to give meaning to the imagery in my work, and to share some of the other techniques and concepts that I use.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth. This is just really incredibly fascinating. I do have to say, I have many, many questions to ask based on everything that you've shared with us. But if other people have questions first, I am going to open the floor. You could unmute and ask a question, or you could put the question in the chat and I can pass that on to Ruth to answer as well. So if anybody has any questions initially, welcome to unmute or put it in the chat.
Hi, Ruth. This is Ann Kuntz, and really enjoyed your exhibit as well as your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, let me get my microphone down. I'm wondering, I'm actually very interested as well as encouraged by the links you have in your work and environmental issues that are crucial for the planet and everybody. Can you talk a little bit more about that journey that brought you into that, and some of the other pieces that you're working on?
For the environmental pieces?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that I've always been interested in embroidering the organisms. Actually, when I think about it, I did the first bacteria petri dishes in 2016, and then I started working on the environmental pieces in 2017, because I really like that organism. And it just, because of the Earth Day show I was invited to exhibit in, I was just feeling like there was something, I fantasized really that these organisms could digest plastic. And I was actually a little shocked to find out it was actually true, that it had been happening. So that research is really fascinating to me. Um, I've always been concerned about the environment and very concerned about global warming. And so when I started reading about bleaching of the coral reefs and the heat basically killing the algae that lives in coexistence with the corals themselves, and instead of these, brilliant colors we see in pictures, or, if you're lucky enough to see them live, contrasting that with the dead coral and the white, it was just something that I couldn't ignore. And then while I'd been collecting plastic, it just kind of, I don't exactly know when I thought I could make organisms out of plastic, but the whole thing seemed to all fit together. The plastic, the coral reef, that has been a theme for me. And I'm right now working on my 4th coral reef installation.
Well, thank you. And the coral reef one that you presented is just amazing. So very impressed by that.
Thank you. Yeah.
It also seems to tie back to when you honored the indigenous people in your first slide.
Mhm.
You said you're from the Philippines, but the indigenous people that are caring for some of the coral reefs in the Philippines and offering guided tours and stuff. So I don't know if you know about that, but it's all
Yeah,
the connections are
yeah,
really amazing. So thank you for that.
yes, I do. In fact, in one of the galleries where I was displaying, not that coral reef, but a different one, a Filipino a person had come in and said he had dived in those waters and he had seen the bleaching. And I was really happy that he said the colors match, because as you know, whenever you crochet or knit, you're just limited by the color palette that's offered at the store. So you can't exactly choose those colors. But it was nice talking to him that he'd actually seen those coral reefs in the Philippines.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? It's a great question.
I have a quick question. What made you decide to keep the tea leaves in the tea bag? I noticed when I saw the show there that the tea was still in the bag, which amazed me.
Yeah, the tea's in there. I feel like the tea added a little bit of dimension to the tea bag, because I have worked on pieces where I took the tea out. And when I stitched the tea bags together, they were so flat and they just lost the character. And I
Yeah.
have to tell you that I stopped making tea bag quilts in 2011 or 2012. I just stopped. But when these tea bag pieces are hung, they continue to leak little bits of tea. I have to vacuum periodically. You would think after 12 years that all the tea would be out, but I think what's happening is that the tea is slowly breaking down and into pieces that are small enough to fit through the holes in the tea bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
it's a design thing, and actually it was fun because whenever I worked on any of these projects, I was surrounded by the smell of tea.
Well, in honor, I've been drinking tea during your presentations.
Thank you.
These are great questions. Does anyone else have a question that based on the diverse art? I know I have a very, just going back, I am really interested to know more about what made you transition from a medical career to a career in the arts.
Yeah, well, I had always done needle crafting. I mentioned how I kind of worked on those when I was in grade school and high school. And I kept working on those things you know, all the way through any kind of work experience. But I didn't think that was be a career. And I love science, so it was easy to go into sciences. But after practicing pediatrics for 11 years, I loved it, but I just couldn't see that I was going to be doing just that for the next 25 years. And I was still even reaching farther to learn more about art. I took graphic design classes, and actually the last year of my practice, I had started art school at California College of the Arts, trying to work part-time in my practice and attending school part-time. And that didn't work. I had to make a choice about whether I would work or go to school. So I made the choice to leave my practice and go to school. And I missed it for about a year, but afterwards, I'm not looking back. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. I feel that my work is out there. And people like you, Heather, are finding it and then asking me to exhibit it. So I think that is probably a best justification for doing it, is that it's something that people are drawn to.
And I think they're drawn to it because it's so unusual. I would say I haven't seen anywhere else where somebody is connecting, um, the science and the connection of what your past history was from a career standpoint and bringing it into the art that you do every day. I had never seen anything like the work that you've been doing. Um, and I was really interested when you were talking about the outbreak of sriracha, if
Oh,
I'm
the
pronouncing
Serratia Recescens?
this,
Yeah.
yes. Um, how did you come upon learning more about that? And I also just really appreciate that through art you can send a message out to people who may not otherwise have known any of this was going on, in a way that's accessible to an audience that might otherwise, not pay attention.
Yeah. Well, whenever I start an artwork, I'll do a lot of reading. I do a lot of research. And I went to the libraries at UC Berkeley, where I live in Berkeley, and I have a library card that allows me to go in and out. And I use their resources to do research. So everything that I've researched, and I have much more detail on my website about those experiments. They were all in traditional medical journals, nothing, it's not a secret, it's out there. And I thought, well, I need to publicize this, because without knowing it, the Army subjected people to human experimentation by allowing this bacteria to drift inland. And the coincidence of the people who were hospitalized getting these infections, I just couldn't let that connection not be recognized by somehow making something. And sometimes I'll read about something, and then the artwork comes about from my reading. And sometimes I get the idea for the artwork first, and then I go do the research. And right now I'm doing a lot more research in coral reefs and in the mycorrhizal networks in the forest, the mycelia connecting the roots of trees. Yeah, because I just feel I have to know that. I just can't make a picture of it or make art out of that without knowing what it's about.
Yeah. Have you also read The Overstory by Richard Powers?
No, I
Which
haven't.
So
But
it talks about the communication through the
yeah.
root system of the trees. It's a really amazing Pulitzer Prize winning book.
Okay,
You
I will
might
look
want to
into it.
explore it. Are there any other questions? Because I definitely have more.
I would just say to tag onto yours, Heather, if you have any other thing, Ruth, on what you're for the communicate or the mycelium trees, because yes, I've read the Overstory, but that's an area I always jokingly say that I'll probably die by a tree falling on me, just to be ironic, because I think the forces out there have a sense of humor. But the communication amongst trees, and I really appreciated that you include that in your presentation, the needlework you did on that. So is there any more you can say about the pieces that you're working on that area?
That's the first piece of mycelia that I'm doing, and I have in mind a couple projects more that haven't been started yet. Um, I just think, since mycelia is kind of one of my main structures that I work with, once I read that book, and the book Finding the Mother Tree is written from the point of view of a graduate student. In fact, it goes all the way back to her childhood and her relationship with the trees and the forest. And it's just fascinating, the story as researching as a graduate student. And now Suzanne Simard is a professor at University of British Columbia. It's a fascinating story. So I encourage you to look at that if you've read the overstory, and I'll read the overstory. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a specific, I know I'm going to do more with that, but I don't have specific artworks in mind yet.
Well, we'll look forward to them when you do create them.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I am interested in knowing if you have a favorite project of all your work, and then and why that's a favorite that
Yeah.
might stand out to you.
Yeah, I think right now it's the bleached coral reef series that I'm working on. I think that it's something that's right in front of us right now. And really, if nothing's really done to stem the global warming, I'm afraid we're going to lose coral reefs in the next decades. You know, I can't be sure about the timing, but the thing about the bleaching, if the temperature is permanently raised, that's really what kills the coral reef. But
Right.
corals can recover if the temperature is not prolonged. So I feel like something like that needs to be worked on. But I think in terms of my favorite work, I feel like when I made that first tea bag quilt way back in school in the year 2000, I thought, this is perfect. I'll never make another piece that good again. But then I have also felt that I've reached major milestones in creativity with the work of the bacteria in petri dishes. And I feel like the coral reef is another one where I feel like, you know, this is important for me to keep doing and keep working on it and discovering.
Do you also have a preferred technique? Because you have so many varied techniques, I think it's really amazing. Many times stitchers just stick to one or two, but you have so many varied techniques. I'm just really intrigued by the art, and if there's a preferred one for you.
Yeah. Yeah, right now it's crochet. It was embroidery for a long time because I really like doing the petri dishes, and I've done other embroidery that I didn't really have time to show at this time. But I would say right now it's crochet.
Mhm.
And because I've made three completed coral reef projects now and starting a fourth, I've run out of plastic because I try not to bring it into the house. So I think I'm going to crowdsource that through the bulletin board called Nextdoor. I don't know if you're familiar with that where you live. Yeah. And see if people will save their plastic for me. You know, I'm looking for bread ties, the little bread tabs, you know, the plastic ones that are square, any kind of cap that's less than an inch and a half wide. I have in mind using, like, you know, a bath scrubby, you know, when they fall apart, they're this big plastic thing. I save little tiny bags that contain garlic. So I have a lot of little pieces, but I want volume. I need lots. So I'm going to have to crowdsource plastic for the next pieces.
I'm sure your neighbors will be happy to share.
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of caps now, but what I'm looking for are bread tags. I need bread tags, twist ties. I would love it if somebody shared their leftover medical plastic discards, but I don't really know how to go about finding people because I don't want to pry into anybody's medical history.
Yeah.
I'm also I was diagnosed with lung disease in 2013, and I have a huge collection of medicine pill bottles, basically. And that, you know, I'm trying to think about how I'm going to tie that plastic into the coral reef. I'm
Right.
not quite sure yet, but, you know, that's a huge source of plastic that basically is untapped.
Right. Absolutely. I was also interested in when you started doing the hexagon work, and then understanding that when you worked with the shape of a pentagon, that it completely changed this shape and made it more three-dimensional. I mean, was that just something that you already knew through simple math that would happen, or was there experimentation, or like how did you come to know that it would end up creating the shape that it did?
Well, when I started to work with a hyperbolic crochet, I started to read everything about non-Euclidean geometry. And that was part of what I was reading, is that the difference between the two-dimensional flat plane and the pentagon. The typical example of that pentagon making a sphere is a soccer ball. Like if you look at a soccer ball, all the black spots are pentagons and all the
Right.
white spots are hexagons. And I never really thought about that. But I would say most of what I do that kind of spurs my creativity to the next thing is a lot of research. And I've been to so much school that I'm really used to doing research. I'm very comfortable in the university libraries. The internet's a great source now because it's so easy, but often it's pretty superficial. I think I always liked, if I can, I always like to go back to the original articles. So back to journals is what I'm really interested in. But you know, there's so much out there for us to discover. Like you just put in bleached coral reef into a search engine, and so much comes up out of that. But when possible, I want to go back to original work, original research.
That's good to hear. Does anyone else have any final questions? Well, as I've said, this has been incredibly fascinating. Your work is again, like I'd said before, unique and like I have never seen before for anyone who has not been, who lives locally or not so locally. The Needlework Show is going on through the end of the month, March 31st, open every day but this coming Tuesday. You can see Ruth's work there that she had talked about, the What Linens Know exhibition, and then also the one of her pieces, the blankie that she showed in the presentation as well. They're really amazing to see in person. And it's been wonderful to learn a little bit more about what brought you to create those pieces and bring them to life in a way that otherwise would have been more difficult to know. We thank you for attending this virtual presentation. We are a nonprofit organization with London Pope-Leighey House. If you'd like to make a donation, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. And we really appreciate being a part of this experience. And Ruth, it's been really wonderful working with you, and we hope to continue to find ways to work in the future.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, really. Yeah, and I enjoyed talking with everybody today.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your Saturday, and hopefully we'll see you at the Needlework Show.